everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Quisha King Show. Thank you so much for watching. So, raising children today can come with a lot of new things that you have to think about that you probably never thought you would have to think about. And that includes things like toxic masculinity when you're raising boys, and that includes gender identity when you're raising girls and boys, and all the things that we've been hearing around the news in the news for the last couple of years. And it can really cause people to maybe even want to not have children, but we don't want you to do that. Please have kids and raise them wisely. And this conversation is so important for a lot of people, all of us, because even if you don't have children and you think, well, I've raised my kids already, I don't have to deal with that. But these people, if we don't raise our children right, they're going to be the ones taking care of you when you're in the nursing home. Nursing homes, they'll be the ones taking care of you, hopefully in your own home. They'll be the ones spending your hard-earned money. So this conversation is extremely important. And another topic that I found out about recently that our guest coming up brought light to my attention is surrogacy, commercial surrogacy at that. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would love to introduce to you the editor-in-chief at the Post-Millennial, Miss Libby Emmons.
Thanks for having me on, Quisha. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Libby. I am so honored to have you on. I really respect what you do. I love what the Post-Millennial does. You guys do great work over there. Really kind of like hard-hitting stories that you don't typically find everywhere else. So thanks for joining me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how'd you get into this whole space?
Okay, my name's Libby Emmons. I am the editor-in-chief of the Post-Millennial, as you said. I've been with the Post-Millennial a few years and came on as editor-in-chief sort of in 2021. Yeah, so I came on really during the pandemic, which was a real blessing for me, actually, because it was nice to have steady pay. I had been a freelancer and it was like, hooray, this is wonderful. It was a great opportunity. I threw myself into it. And I think that the outlet is really great. I have a terrific staff of writers and social media people who do a really wonderful job. And, they make the outlet what it is. I have a theater background primarily. I spent most of my career writing plays and producing plays and being part of the indie theater scene in downtown New York City. I lived in New York City for a very long time. I consider it my home. I grew up in Massachusetts, Philadelphia, and New York.
Wow. So I used to live in New York too. I was a professional singer and songwriter myself. So we have that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I lived in the Bronx for a couple of years, and then I moved to Manhattan. And yeah, I did some off-Broadway stuff, and yeah, but mostly like recording and singing with bands. Yeah,
that's awesome.
It was like my dream as a child. That's what I wanted to do. And then I moved to New York. I grew up in Connecticut. And so I moved to New York, and yeah, I started doing that. And so that's so cool. It's one of the little things.
So we're both New Englanders and New Yorkers. That's actually pretty cool. I love that.
Yeah, that is so funny. And then we end up in the same sort of space too. That's like so crazy. Yeah. So how did you, going from the entertainment industry, which is extremely liberal, the art world, how did you make your transition over to kind of this space where we're talking about conservative issues? What's considered now conservative, which is not always technically conservative, but
I mean, I think that conservatism today has a lot of liberal values that really are backing it, primarily free speech. I think that's a big issue in the conservative movement today, people being able to speak their minds without losing their jobs, for that. And I'm a full supporter of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, which I think is sometimes overlooked. But what happened in the arts, and maybe you saw some of this too, what happened in the arts was that it was very liberal, and then, and that's sort of fine. But then we ended up in an area where artists were being asked to be activists. And there was this idea that if you were not an art activist, your art was, not what anybody wanted to see or produce. So essentially what that did was turn art and artists into propaganda and propagandists That's not something I could get behind as an artist, as someone who, like you, as a child, I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be an artist in New York. I wanted to make my life there. And I did for a very long time. But things really started to change. And in theater, especially, which is where I was, I noticed that there started to be an influx of men who were saying that they were women coming into women's art spaces, which primarily is about money. So when you're a woman writer, when you're a woman playwright, woman producer, you go after grants, right? Like you're putting in grant proposals. A lot of the grant proposals have very specific requirements. You know, for example, this grant is only open to women writers. This one is only open to minority writers. This one is specifically about the Black experience. This one's for, you know, Asians to do things. So the women's grants, I applied for women's grants, and they started changing their language of requirements from, you know, woman writer to woman or woman identified writer. And I was just like, what is this? This is not the same thing.
Right.
And I was looking at it and I was like, wait a minute. So to combat that there are too many white men, perhaps, as the idea in making theater, we're now going to give white men in dresses more money. Oh,
right.
Okay. That makes so much sense.
So stupid.
So I just started getting a lot more critical and opening a critical eye to that. Another thing that was a problem for me was how there was no longer a place for a pro-life Democrat. This was a thing. It's like, wait a second. So now Catholics just automatically, unless you are completely opposed to your actual stated religion, then you can't be a Democrat. So there were an awful lot of things, but mostly it was the trans issue. And when I spoke out on trans issues, that became a problem, not for me, as it turned out eventually, but certainly for my career.
Right. Oh my gosh. You know, I in the Black church, I hate to say it like that, but there is such a thing, you know. You people don't even address that, Libby. It's not even a thing. So when I first came into you know, conservatism, I was raised in the church, but then I went through kind of like my searching phase, like, why do I even believe what I believe? Because I really didn't know. I didn't know how to provide a defense for my faith or anything like that. And once I got solidified in my Christian faith, I still voted, you know, for things that were totally against my faith. And everybody around me was doing the very same thing. So it wasn't even anybody there to kind of check what was happening.
It's like a real cognitive dissonance.
Seriously, check this out. So when I first had, so what happened to me was I was having a conversation with my little sister, and we were talking about BLM. And this was like right after the 2016 election. And so we were talking, at this point, you know, I was all the news I consumed was like CNN and MSNBC. So I was totally like in the thing. And so I said, she said that she liked what they were doing, but she wished they would show up when there was like Black on Black crime. And I'm like, well, that's because so many Black men are being killed by the police. Da, 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 da. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to go look up the numbers. I'm going to go see how many unarmed Black men have been killed by the police as opposed to, you know, the crime in Black on Black crime. Well, you can imagine. I was like, oh, what is going on here? I didn't really understand how there was like thousands of these cases of, you know, Black on Black crime. And there was like, at that time, whenever I was looking at it, was like less than 10. So it was really
I found that shocking as well. When I eventually started looking at that, it was like, oh, it's not actually true what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
It was such a mind like short circuit, because everybody and everything around me was telling me like this was a problem. There were riots in the streets. There was still, I mean, it was everywhere. And it was so confusing to me. So it prompted me to keep on digging to, you know, kind of like other stereotypes of things that I had heard that, you know, that may not be true. And I found Dr. Thomas Sowell, Walter Williams, Milton Friedman. And I was like, whoa, like, oh my God, I never heard of these people. Da, da, da. And the real transformation came. I was sitting on my couch, and the Lord spoke to my heart and told me that my skin color had become an idol in my life. Girl,
Oh, fascinating. I've heard you say that before.
and I tell this story because every time I tell it, I'm like transported back to that moment, because it was like I was in bondage and I was actually free. I became
That's wild.
actually free. And it was like, it was just it was a huge moment in my life. And when I brought this to my family, my Christian believing family, and I said, how are we going to reconcile voting for people who support abortion? How are we going to reconcile people who literally promote, all these things that are against the Bible, same-sex marriage, abortion, not working for what you in the Bible, it says you have to work. If you don't work, you don't eat, all of the things that we said we believed in. And the response was not to press into what the Bible said or what we say our faith is. It was, you're crazy. You've drunk the Kool-Aid. You are the one, like, we're not even going to deal with that. No, it's like Democrat or nothing else. And I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, this is insane. Like,
The thing with abortion too that's nuts is because I was blown away when I looked at the numbers as to the racial breakdown of abortions.
mhm,
And most like the largest group of women in the US who undergo abortion are Black women.
no,
And it's like, and that doesn't even include California, who doesn't keep these numbers and
right.
has more abortions than any other state and has a very
Yeah,
large Black population. And
yeah,
I thought to myself, why are we doing this to Black women? Like,
right,
why are we telling Black women they shouldn't be mothers? And so you
right.
have these upper class white women who preach all these values, get married,
Mhm,
keep their babies,
mhm.
telling Black women to kill their children. And it's just like, what kind of genocide is this on
Right.
the Black population in the United States?
Yeah,
And what is this doing to the hearts of Black women who perhaps want to be mothers
yeah.
and then are like, I mean, we know as women, we know, we have friends, we hear about these things.
Mhm.
Lots of women are coerced into abortion. We know
Yeah,
that for sure.
yeah,
Men push back against me. They say, no, women have all the power. And I'm like, no,
yeah,
you're missing this key thing, which is like
yeah,
so many women I know have been
yeah.
coerced into abortions multiple times.
Multiple
Um,
times by family members too. It can happen by family members. It can
by the
happen
men who say they
by
love
the
them.
men. Girl, it is such. And then what now, I haven't dug into this, and you might actually know more about this than I do, but I recently heard this. And this thing that they're pushing, the the maternity mortality morbidity, I think it is,
Right.
with black women, and saying like it's astronomical, but they're just saying, oh, that's because the doctors are racist. That's why black women are dying. But there's a guy that I follow on Instagram, and he was talking about this. He said, actually, it's because of the abortions. Their wombs are not
Oh my goodness.
capable. And he was saying that this was something that was cited at the NIH. Now, I have not gone to look this up, but it
That's worth
actually
digging
makes
into.
a lot of sense, because
Mhm.
I had an abortion,
Mhm.
and I wasn't coerced. I was afraid, and believed a lot of things that just were not true. But I have not, since then, like when I was married and I tried to conceive after that, and I was not able to. And so I always wondered, like, gosh, I wonder if that's why. And anyway, I don't want to get into all that. That's not really the topic, but I think it's something that makes a lot of sense. If your womb has been so damaged, and then now you actually got blessed to have bring life, but
Mhm.
your womb is so damaged that you can't sustain it anymore. You can't even sustain your own life at this point, because your body
Yeah.
has just been so damaged. I don't know. I think
It's
it's something
interesting.
that
That's like they say that once you have a C-section, they don't encourage you to deliver naturally.
that's true. Yeah.
And, they're like, that's a scarring issue.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And yeah. So it's definitely a thing. So this, raising children, and this attack on the family, this attack against mothers, this attack against our children is a topic, as you know, that has been just so close to my heart as I've gotten into this space. I could not have even imagined that this is where I would have ended up, but here I am, and I told God that I dedicate the rest of my life to this. So, which is why I know that I watch you all the time on Tim Pool, and you mentioned that you have a son.
I
And
do.
yeah, wait, what did you said you have two?
No, just one.
Just one. Okay, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
no, I said I
Okay.
do. Yeah, I do.
Okay. And I was just so curious how you're raising him. Like, what do you guys talk about when it comes to like toxic masculinity? What are you telling him? What are the questions that he's asking you? So I thought you'd be a great person to.
Yeah, I have, it's interesting. He was in a public school in Brooklyn, New York.
Mm-hmm.
He's no longer in that school. I've taken him out. It wasn't working for him.
Yeah.
And so I pulled him out of that school. But in his school, a lot of this stuff came up, and then he would come home and we would talk about it.
Yeah.
That happened with a number of issues, including toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
including concerns about Christianity, LGBTQ plus pride was involved, BLM.
Yeah.
And at each step of the way, I've tried to be honest and direct with my views and what I perceive as going on around us. I've tried also to lean into Jesus' teachings from the New Testament about kindness, meeting people where they stand, respecting all people, respecting life. My son first asked me about where babies come from when he was 4 years old.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I could go with euphemisms, or I could just be direct, even though he's not going to totally understand.
Yeah.
So that began the conversation about that, a conversation that still is ongoing. He's open to ask me any questions. Sometimes I bring it up. Not as much these days because he's 12 and it gets a little weird. He's like, Mom.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with like BLM and stuff too, it was interesting. After George Floyd's death in 2020, he was in remote school because it was the pandemic.
Yeah.
And his teachers announced a 2-day lesson on, what was it? White privilege and systemic racism.
Wow.
So I listened in for those 2 days, and then I corrected a lot of information. I had to answer the question, Mom, are we racist? Is our family racist? And I was like, no, we're not racist, and he's like, but we're white. And I'm
was
like,
that heartbreaking for you? Like, was that, or were you like, oh, this is so stupid? Like, to me, I don't know, but that, like, when you instill values
I was really pissed.
Oh, you were pissed. Okay, yeah.
Whoever it was talking about this as being part of our family doesn't know our family. Like,
right. Exactly.
I mean, my son's dad's mom, so his grandmom, who passed before he got a chance to know her, but was a public defender in Philadelphia who made it her personal mission to make sure that innocent Black men weren't put in jail. That was like, that's what she wanted to do. That's what she did. She worked really hard at that. My grandmom was a teacher at one of the first integrated schools, I believe, in Brownsville, Brooklyn in the 1940s.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was just like, if you look back at our history, going back to the New Englanders way back, like there were abolitionists, this was not like, we don't have a history of racism in our family in the way that your school is telling you that all white people do. Like, it's just not exactly real. Even if you look at the founding fathers and their contradictions, they had many, so it was really, that was a fascinating conversation. Mom, why does my social studies teacher hate Christians? And I was like, your social studies teacher doesn't hate Christians. And he was like, yeah, no, this is what he said. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think your social studies teacher might hate Christians. Don't worry about it. Just don't don't worry about it.
Right.
You're not going to be in this school for much longer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So two funny stories. So actually same daughters. So I have two daughters. My oldest, so I was getting dressed one day and she goes, she had to be like 3 or 4, like around your son's age when he asked about sex and stuff. And she goes, Mom, what are those? And she like pointed, she was like going into point for my nipples. And I was like, I don't know. What do I do? Do I say something? Do I tell her the accurate terms, or do I just make it, fun? So I went with the fun. I said, oh, I had heard somewhere, sometime, one time, one of my friends say, "Oh, I just call them Cheerios." So I was like, "These are mommy's Cheerios," and she goes, "Oh, so I can eat them." I'm like, "It's a nibble. It's a nibble." They're called nipples. So
It's not food.
from that point on, I was like, "We're gonna keep these conversations accurate. We're not
Mhm.
gonna give it names and all that kind of stuff because that can lead into some other. You want them to know
Yeah, and it gets
exactly what it is."
confusing. Yeah, I've tried it every step of the way to be honest with my son when he asks,
Mhm.
these kind of questions.
Yeah.
As far as toxic masculinity, I believe I've said to him, men are great. The
Mhm.
world needs men. The world
Yeah.
needs men to go out there and work hard and do
Yeah.
dangerous jobs, um, and
Mhm.
to take risks and be bold
Yeah.
and lead.
Yeah.
I'm also very clear about expectations.
Mhm.
So my parents were kind of vague about their expectations. I'm still not entirely clear what they wanted from me. I don't know. Yeah, right. Like,
Yeah.
so I've said to him, I'm like, listen, when you grow up, I want you to be a strong, resilient, responsible man
Mhm.
who can take care of himself and the people
Mhm.
he loves
Yeah.
and knows
So
how to work hard. Like, I just am very clear about what is expected and what
mhm.
is expected of a man as
Yeah.
well.
So what is his response to that? Like how, because I'm sure he's got to be dealing with, like, his friends whose parents maybe not so, savvy as to what we need to be teaching our young boys. Does he ever struggle with, like, okay, ooh, like, mom, like, what do I do? Because you're instilling one thing into him, and then, maybe his friends or, people that he's around or society is telling another message. Like, what is his response?
I've been really blessed with this child. He's an incredibly independent thinker.
Mm,
He is not easily swayed by anything. I mean, he's a little obstinate. He's definitely a little stubborn, but he's
yeah.
also open-minded. So, like when his friends have favorite music that they like, he comes
Mhm.
home and says, "Let's play Debussy." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." If that's what
Okay.
I don't know any Debussy, like point me in
Okay.
the right direction.
All right.
I still listen to weird 90s music.
Yeah. Me too.
But yeah, he's very independent.
Yeah.
He likes obscure things, and we're burgeoning on the teen years. So I sometimes say, in a couple years, when you hate me, just remember I'm just still actually just me. I'm not
Mhm.
different. My expectations aren't changing,
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But as of right now, he makes up his own mind,
Yeah.
and it's hard to sway him otherwise.
That's so cool. I love that. One of the things, so I wrote my daughter, my oldest, my youngest is a special needs child. So her coming it was like, it was just a different thing. So I didn't,
Mhm.
it's different. But I wrote my daughter a letter when she was like just born. I was like, yeah, when you're 14 and when you're a teenager, you're gonna think I don't know anything, and you're gonna think that you know everything. But when I pulled her out of public school, all of those weird things that she was becoming that child that didn't want to listen to me, that didn't want
Mhm.
to, she was being the typical teenager of what I had heard of whatever all the typical teenagers are. Once I pulled her out, though, it's like a phenomenon, this strange thing happened. She started to want my opinion more. She'll like, now she'll be like, "Mom, you're my friend." And I'm always like, "I'm not your friend, I'm your mother." But I know what she means. She's like, we have
He trusts
long,
you.
she
Mhm.
does. And she loves to have these long conversations with me. We talk about boys and we talk about sex and we talk about everything. And I really feel like sometimes the public schools, many times, is the reason why our kids become these, they metamorph into these creatures that we do not know. Many times we don't even like, because we're like, who are you? I didn't raise you like this. And they bring that back home and you're like, I don't
Mhm.
know this person. And so it creates like this tension. But now it's amazing. I'm like, I wish I would have done this years ago.
That's such a blessing. That's
It is such
wonderful.
a blessing. And I want to,
Mhm.
I've been telling parents who have teenage daughters or kids, listen, you might want to consider pulling your kids out of public school, because you will watch all of those weird things that they picked up. You will watch it fall away. and they come back to themselves. It is, I love it. Such a beautiful thing. Did you do private? Are you homeschooling? Like what? Or did you
He's
put
at
him in
a,
a?
he's at a, we moved out of the state and I just put him in a different school near where we live now.
Oh, okay. That's
Mhm.
cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a charter school, but it's working out great, much smaller class sizes.
Yeah.
And he's doing better and he likes it. He likes this, he misses his friends, but he
Yeah.
likes the school better. He misses the city, but he
Yeah.
likes the school better.
Yeah.
So, New York will always be there, hopefully.
Right.
Right.
Hopefully. I've always loved New York, but it's just so different now. It's just not the same. But
Yeah, I mean, it was so great. I mean, it was just, I love New York. I'll always love New York. But I really think that de Blasio and the pandemic destroyed the city so thoroughly, as though that were their intention. I will never forget the New Year's Eve. What was it? New Year's Eve 2020 going into 2021. And Bill de Blasio said no big celebrations in Times Square. And then he and his wife were dancing in the middle of Times Square, broadcast live on television to all of us sitting at home.
Right.
Unable, like being told we can't go out to the party. Oh, but you can watch the leader of the city and his wife have a lovely time, have New York, have Times Square all to themselves.
Yeah.
That was the year that Anderson Cooper, and I forget what the other gentleman's name is, who was there.
Andy Cohen, I think.
Cohen. They got trashed on CNN.
Right. Yeah. How it's
and
so
I was
insulting.
like, I am so here for you insulting Bill de Blasio while you are trashed.
Yes, straight trash. And then Cuomo too, straight, like what they did to those elderly people, what they did during the pandemic is utterly, it is a crime against humanity. I thoroughly believe that. And until I'm proven wrong, that's where I stand. That I believe it was.
And then you even have Rachel Levine, the trans diversity hire for the Biden administration, did the exact same thing in Pennsylvania, but pulled his mother out first.
Right, I forgot about that.
That is so unethical. It's almost as unethical as pushing weird drugs and surgeries on minors who can't consent.
Yeah. It's crazy how all of these things are just happening. This rogue, just complete disrespect of humanity, of children. It is a disgusting. I can't even believe that we're doing this in the United States of America. It's unbelievable.
We tell men and women that their bodies don't matter. We tell them that their lives don't matter, that their reproductive capabilities don't matter. The only thing we tell them that matters is their desire and whims in the moment. And it's just it's not an acceptable way to treat God's creation that we are.
It's like this. It's like postmodernism on steroids. Like it is like, I feel like it's Stalin and Lenin's and Karl Marx.
And Mao. Don't forget Mao.
And Mao. I feel like I don't think they could have imagined a better outcome of like all of their crazy communist dreams come true. Like it's sick. It is just really sick.
Yeah, and here in the U.S., we thought that if we just stayed open to China and traded with them, then they would eventually come around to democracy. And instead, we're coming around to communism. It's like the reverse. Yeah, it's really a problem.
So crazy. Did you know, speaking of like communism and stuff, did you know that the Frankfurt School came into America like in 1923 to your alma mater?
Really?
Columbia University. Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. What was that? That's like Bertrand Russell and
the Frankfurt School was a school created. It was a communist school in Germany. It was like where all like
it was philosophers, right? It was
like the philosophers. Yeah. And so they call it the social research. I think it's the social research program now. That's what it's called now at Columbia. But yeah, it came in the 20s and nobody said a mumbling word. Nobody was like, wait a minute, we don't want like, no, we're not going to have your communist school come over here to America.
Well, there was a lot of, I mean, there were communists in the US at the time, and also that came into the theater scene as well, because American theater is so influenced by Russian dramatic style. As a theater artist, I certainly was as well, because some of the work is absolutely spectacularly
Mhm.
beautiful and
Yeah.
moving and all of that. But yeah, it did bring with it this subcurrent of an ideology that I do think is anathema to democracy.
Yeah. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. Because I was wondering how critical race theory came into America. Like, how did that even get into the universities? But that's when I started learning about like the Frankfurt School and
Mm-hmm.
the public school system, and how we imported this mass compulsory education system from Prussia, and then all of the thing. I'm like, no wonder,
Yeah.
no
Well, in
wonder.
Germany, I think in Germany, you're not allowed to send your kids to religious school. I might have that wrong, but I think that's
Okay.
correct.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised because Prussia is now, well, it doesn't exist anymore, and it is now Germany, and that's where this whole thing started with the compulsory mass education.
Mm-hmm.
So, wouldn't be surprised. They created a very well oiled machine over there to dumb down the kids, kill the imagination, and make them minions of the state. So, yeah, we thought that was a good idea, and so yeah, they went over there,
I
took a
mean,
look
I
at.
do think that making education accessible, being able to learn to read,
Oh yeah.
learning, all of your math and everything, I
Mhm.
do think that that's important. Where we
Oh, for
run into
sure.
trouble is when it gets injected with all of these activist ideas
Yeah.
that squash free thought and critical thinking.
Yeah. No, no, of course. We definitely
Yeah.
need, our children to be educated, but not in a way that dumbs them down, not in a
No,
way
that is
that.
an issue. Like, so much of education now seems to be about making children manageable.
Mhm.
Um, and
That was
I
on
want my
purpose. That was on
child
purpose.
to, yeah, I want my
Mhm.
child to manage himself.
Mhm. No, they don't want that, Libby. They don't want that because back then you had to be ready to go and work at the factories. Even
Mhm.
the bell ringing at school, like when the bell rings, that was all a part of training the children to go from like station to station and work in the factories.
So maybe now we're just training them to be on universal basic income. That's why they're teaching them
Yes.
nothing.
Exactly. And they have no will to do anything. Their creativity is like, it's nothing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just not there.
Yeah. But I when I saw you on Allie Beth Stuckey's show Relatable the other day, you were talking about a topic that I wasn't really aware of, but it kind of it affirmed. I was affirmed in my thinking of a show that I saw with Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, who I love. Jordan Peterson, fantastic guy. I've met Dave Rubin a few times. He seems very nice. I don't know him very much. Don't know him really, but they were talking about him and his partner using a surrogate to carry their children, and the way Jordan Peterson kind of just chimed in on it, it was very surprising. And so when I heard your stance against commercial surrogacy, it just kind of all came full circle for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was right. Like something is not right about this thing. But can you just kind of tell us about like how you came into understanding this, what brought it to your attention, why it's not good? Can you help us understand this?
Yeah. So I had, I was raised by two feminists who had completely different ideas on what that meant. My mom
Mhm,
and my stepmom, and
mhm,
I grew up with mostly my dad and my stepmom.
mhm,
So I've always been very interested in women's rights. I've always
mhm.
been interested in children's,
Yeah,
like the rights of children to not be abused,
yeah.
to not be separated from their parents, things like that.
Mhm,
And so I was interested in that kind of stuff. I had a child in 2010,
mhm,
and I started to get have a closer look into surrogacy. And then I actually talked with Jennifer Lahl at the Center for Bioethics,
mhm,
who had done a documentary on surrogacy that I watched that was really pretty devastating. And
mhm.
there are a bunch of things about surrogacy in a voluntary sense that I understand. For example, if a woman has a brother who is married and they can't
Mhm.
bear children, I can
Yeah.
see making that decision for yourself and your family on a voluntary basis. But when we turn reproduction into an industry, which it certainly is an industry today, and we make women just gestators in that industry, and we make children the products to be bought and sold,
Yeah.
I think we are doing something to humanity, to children, and to women, and to men that is not necessarily going to achieve what we're looking for in humanity. And I also think that perhaps there, when we talk about surrogacy and we say, well, the woman consented to that, just because you consent to something doesn't mean that it's moral or correct or something that society should be furthering. So there's many cases of surrogacy in the United States. There's many companies that connect people who want to rent wombs and buy the children as the product with women who are willing to do this. You can manage to make a fair sum of money from renting out your body. You can also make a fair sum of money being a prostitute. There's not too much difference between the two necessarily. I'm not a big proponent of prostitution either. You know, I don't think it's moral. You know, and certainly just because something is legal does not make it moral. Those two things in many cases are not at all the same thing. So with surrogates, what happens is if you are going to be a surrogate, there are rules. You have to already have had children, which means that mothers are the ones who are undergoing this process. And so that's a real thing. There are many cases where women are mothers, they are married, they are renting out their bodies. I think that's damaging to the children in the family. I think that's damaging to the husband in that family as well. If I were a husband, which I am obviously not, I would find it disturbing to watch my wife carry another man's child for money. I would feel pretty bad about myself and my ability to care for my family and to provide for them if I had to watch my wife rent out her body or sell herself in the back of a van, what have you. Like, I don't think that's great for a man who is otherwise ought to be leading his family. That's really a shame. I don't think it's great for the kids who are watching what should be a brother or sister then get given away. What does that mean to them about the value of their own lives? And I don't think it's great for the baby to be manufactured to be intentionally without their mother. In many cases also, what you have, I mean, in all cases, because obviously what you have is a donor egg. So you have a donor egg, you have donor sperm, whoever sperm it is, and that is created an embryo and implanted into the woman. Many embryos are implanted at once. This results in multiples, which is already a much more dangerous pregnancy. Additionally, when you are a surrogate and you are implanted with another woman's egg, what happens is you need to take drugs that prevent the rejection of organs. They're used for that purpose.
I did not know that.
Yeah, because a woman's body doesn't recognize another woman's egg as the appropriate thing to be in her uterus.
Wow, I did not. So my father had he had a kidney transplant. He is now passed on, but he had to take those drugs too, and it's hard on your body. Like his skin color, like he went through a lot just to get, just for the kidney. So I can't even imagine, women and our hormones and just all of those. I couldn't, I don't even.
Well, plus it's IVF. So it's also all the drugs that you need to inject yourself with prior to make yourself fertile for IVF. So it's all of these drugs at once. My primary issues with surrogacy are about the child that is manufactured and about the woman and her family who are put through this process. There's also substantial, and this happens in America. In many parts of Western Europe, surrogacy is not legal. So French couples come to the US to do this, or they go to Canada for this, because it's just not legal in France. It's just not legal. There are also many cases of women in what we used to term the third world or the developing world sell their bodies for this purpose. So, just like in Thailand, you have like a very major prostitution industry.
Yeah.
In other parts of the world, you have a big surrogacy industry. So I know that was true in Nepal. I think that Nepal no longer allows it. I may be incorrect about that, but Nepalese women were undergoing surrogacy, or it was actually Indian women in Nepal were doing surrogacy. And I should look up what the current thing is because it's been a while since I looked that up. But what happens is surrogates go to a place where surrogacy is legal, and they all room together and everybody's undergoing this together. This is women in South America are rented out for this purpose as well. So in many cases, what we have is the realization of the Handmaid's Tale, where you have people with means who are able to impregnate women who do not have the means to get the money in some other way. And that's what we have. And, I think that's really unfortunate for the women. I think it's unfortunate for poor women globally. I think it's unfortunate for American women with families.
And for the children,
the children.
Yes, because what I got when I was listening to this, and the thing that kind of bothered me about Dave and Jordan Peterson's conversation was the idea that his partner, who he described as a little more feminine and nurturing than that would be, not that he was saying, I want to try to put it properly in its right context. He wasn't saying like that will be good, like that is a substitute for a mother. But kind of he was saying that,
I have no doubt that there are families that partake of surrogacy, straight families, gay families, that then go on to raise their children. And their children are very loved and all of those things. And I wish only the best for those families and for the children in those families. But I don't think that commercial surrogacy should be the kind of industry that it is turning into. There's also the byproduct, which is countless embryos that are created and then not gestated. And that's an issue with IVF as well. I think that, it's very difficult for me. I have adoption in my family. I have family members, of course, as we all do, or friends who are products of IVF or any of these things. And all of these lives are great. And these are all wonderful people. And I would not give them back anywhere. But I do think that we have to take a closer look at the manufacture of human beings that we are doing.
Absolutely. And I don't, we already have enough people trying to tell boys that they can be girls and girls that they can be boys. And there is no substitute for a mother. There is no substitute for a mother. Like, you can't just say, okay, well, I'm a little more, like, I can't say, well, I'm a little more masculine, so I'm just going to like take on the role of a father. Like, I can't just say that. And I think when we start to when we don't even question some of these things, like we don't even question surrogacy. Like, I had never even heard, when I heard you talking about it, it never even dawned on me that there might be, kind of something not right about that. I was just thinking like, oh, well, these people want to have children, and that's, we want we want more babies in the world. We want, families to, but now when I hear more in depth about what is actually happening, it's like, okay, wait a minute. So I think what I get from all of this is we need to start to question more about things that we have come into it's just commonplace in our society. We don't even question it. We're not even like, okay, well, what is this actually? What are the consequences that are going to come, when these things are like full into society?
And what is the impact on a woman who gives her eggs or a man who gives his sperm in terms of, taking responsibility? What does it mean to give up responsibility for your own reproductive material?
Right.
What does it mean to, I have a friend actually who was a sperm donor earlier in his life, and he recently met one of the children that was created from that sperm, and he was like so overjoyed and happy to meet her, and is hoping to have a relationship with her, because it turns out that even just jerking off into a cup, like you end up feeling a connection.
Isn't that amazing?
Who you are eventually, and what came from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and giving your eggs too, I understand, is a very painful experience. And I think that would be difficult too, to just be like, oh, something that came from my body has been with me my whole life, because of course you have the eggs in your body from the time you're, before you're born. They're in there.
You come with all the ones you're gonna get.
Right. I remember joking with a friend of mine when she was pregnant with a girl, like, you're carrying your grandchildren right now.
Oh my gosh, that's so wild.
Right.
I say now, I was like, we're raising our children's parents. So I've been saying that too. I try to impress upon people how important it is that we do a good job with raising these kids up, because like you're raising your grandkids as parents. So whatever you do is, how this turns out, it's on you.
Right. Yeah.
But my my father was adopted and my mother did not know her father. And so we were able to find my mother's dad. He had passed on. Unfortunately, she never got to meet him, but she always felt that something was missing. My dad, he searched forever to find out who his biological father was. I mean, watching both of my parents struggle with this identity issue, this abandonment issue, like watching them struggle with that, when we're having these conversations, it is such a big deal. It's like, it's not just putting your sperm into a cup. It's so much more than that. Like being a parent, bringing life. And it's supposed to mean a lot. It's supposed to be a sacred thing. That's why God set it up that way, because it is you. It is an extension of you. And it is a miracle, that these little people get here. And if we're not it's a miracle. And I think, just expanding this conversation and just starting to question some of the things that have become commonplace in our society, I think it's a great thing. And oh my gosh, I cannot believe that we're actually like at our time already. But yeah, so I really appreciate you not being afraid to touch on those topics that are kind of, society doesn't really talk about,
Yeah, I think we should be asking these questions. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm not saying, for the most part, I don't have any answers at all. I just think that we should be questioning some of these things that we're doing, questioning whether or not we are doing right by humanity, doing right by, what is God's creation. Absolutely. And I don't think that we know. I think so often we just rush headlong into what feels good and what seems to be the right thing, that we don't offer a lot of criticism. And I think that the issues with trans as well, this idea that you should affirm your kids and what they want, that sounds really beautiful and sweet. And it turns out actually to not be real at all.
Right.
If your children come home and they say some sort of wild thing, like I remember I came home and I told my mom I wanted to drop out of high school. And then later I told her I wanted to drop out of college. Later I told her that I wanted to just drop out of society altogether, and she's just like, no, hon, no, no. Should she have said to me, yes, drop out of high school, go run around and be a hobo and hop freight trains. I had a friend at the time who was hopping freight trains. Yeah. He was a little older than me. And I was like, I want to do this. And she was like, should she have affirmed me in my wish? I'm grateful she did not.
Right. I say we would never affirm anorexia. We would never look at a 5'1", 75, 85 pound, child and say, yes, keep not eating, keep making yourself sick. We would never do that. We would consider that to be cruel. We would never
let them get tattoos.
I mean, there's so many common sense things that we do that it's so wild that we don't do those same things when it comes to the gender identity. Like what happened to just like we don't affirm all these other things when your kid comes in and say, I want to be a dragon. Like,
Right.
it's like it's just so it's insane.
Well,
It's
we've
insane.
replaced the soul with gender, and that's where we are now. We
Okay.
worship the self, and we've replaced the soul with gender, and
You
it's
said that, and can you explain that a little bit more? We have a few more minutes. Like,
humor in it.
yeah,
Yeah, so I think what's happened is we have replaced God with the self. We have
right.
decided to worship our own desires
Mm-hmm.
instead of the Christian idea of, trying to trust God and put your faith that He has a path for you. We
Right.
have determined that our own personal desires are, in fact, that path.
Yeah.
We have done away with the idea of a soul. In fact, I was
Mm-hmm.
speaking to, this was at a TPUSA event a little less than a year ago. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
last June. And there was a woman who stood up and asked a question and said that so many of her peers from when she was young, if they had any sort of issue, they immediately assumed that it was a mental issue and they would seek psychiatric help or medication. And
Mm.
she said that even the concept of a soul was something that was not discussed. And if there are spiritual issues, how can a person address a spiritual issue if they don't understand that they have an everlasting soul, and if that's not something
Mm.
that is part of their understanding of who they are? And so, in many cases, what happens with young people, I feel, is that as you are searching to discover who you are and
Mhm.
where you come from and what you're about, you are looking for something metaphysical. And
Yeah.
we have determined as a culture that gender is that metaphysical thing.
Mhm.
We say, I feel like a girl inside,
Yeah.
I feel like a boy inside. No one can define what
Mm.
feeling like a girl or feeling like a boy means. It
Right.
doesn't mean, if you're a boy and you feel like a girl, it doesn't mean that you feel like you have breasts. It
Right.
doesn't mean like that you feel like, you know, you have cramps. Like, it doesn't mean any of those things. I don't
Right.
know what it means when someone says
Mhm.
that. When a girl says, I feel like a boy, I don't know what that means. I
Right.
do know that when I was younger, I did not want to be a woman writer. I wanted to
Mhm.
just be a writer. I
Right.
didn't want any of that extra womanhood baggage.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something to that in it.
Mhm.
I really don't know. But we
Mhm.
have determined that this metaphysical quest that we are on is actually a search to find our gender, not
Mm.
to discover and understand our soul. And I
Right.
think that that's an issue. I also think it's no mistake that so many of these transitions are undertaken as a person enters puberty, which
Mhm.
in cultures around the world, from like from the Maasai to the Maori to the,
Mhm.
Jews,
Right.
at 13 is when you enter adulthood. That
Right.
was true of Native American tribes as well. Like, you go out in the
Mhm.
woods, all these different things. Um, and we have ripped away the rite of passage of
Mhm.
so many of our religious and cultural
Mhm.
traditions,
Yeah.
and we have replaced it with going off in search of your gender. So when
Mhm.
you're 13 and you determine that your gender is different than what your body indicates it should
Mhm.
be, you get to change your name. You
Right.
get to declare who you are. You get to say,
Mhm.
I am an adult. I can make all of these decisions on my
Yep.
own. It's coming out as the American rite of passage. And it's sort of the only one we've got these days of
Yeah.
any kind of commonality across cultures. So
Mm.
that's why I say that I feel that in American culture, in our death cult, gender has replaced the soul, the self has replaced God, and we
Right.
are lost.
Completely. That is so powerful. That and I totally I understand exactly what you mean because your soul, we are taught that is like that is it's like your personality. It's kind of it's who you are. And so when these kids are saying no, I'm not that. I'm something else and I can define what that is even though you came with this soul that you have and you came, God made you who you are. We're saying no, we're rejecting that and making up our own thing. And it is
Mhm.
again another type of idolization. It's again another
Mhm.
type of
Thoroughly, like you were saying, yeah.
yeah, another worship. You're worshiping you're rejecting what God gave you and you're worshiping another something that society gave you, something that quite frankly, Satan gave you.
Right.
And
And
you
it
know,
doesn't even make a lot of sense because it
it
can't even be defined. Matt
right.
Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman?
Yeah.
no one was willing to. I mean, where's the actual definition? We know
Right.
what it is, and we refuse to acknowledge it.
Right.
At our own peril.
Yeah. Wow. Well, fascinating conversation, Libby. Thank you so much for joining me today. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and any projects or anything you got going on?
I'm at Libby Emmons on Twitter, and my main project is the Post Millennial, and you can check us out at thepostmillennial.com.
Thank you so much, everybody. I will put her links in the description box below. Make sure you subscribe and give us 5 stars wherever you watch your podcast. Libby, thank you so much again for joining me today. Thank you guys for watching and listening. I will see you next time.